So here I am back in Delphi again. It's a much nicer day than the last time I was here, very sunny. And I thought I would do a little walk through the archaeological site to see what it was like if you were coming here in ancient times to get yourself a prophecy. So let's start from the beginning. You'd arrive to the area of Delphi, which is nestled between these two rocks, the Phedriads, they're called, the rocks. And between them is the spring of Castalia. So that's down in this area, down sort of by where those trees are, those tall cypress trees. You'd purify yourself, and then you would come up to this area here. So the city of Delphi was outside of the area where I'm standing now. The first part of the area here would be this bit here, which was where the shops were. So you would come here and you would purchase an offering to leave at the temple, which is up there. So this area here is outside of these walls. You can see the walls. The walls delineate what is the sacred precinct, so behind those walls, and where I am now, which is the public area. So people would come here, and the city was down below and all around. But then once you got in here, this was the sacred precinct. So let's walk up, starting with the sacred way here. As we're walking along, you can see all these blocks of stone left and right, which were the foundations of treasury buildings. So treasury buildings were repositories, basically, that city-states, ancient Greek city-states had here, where they would keep precious offerings to the god Apollo, and then spoils of war and other things. What's interesting, if you look, is that on the outside of these treasury buildings, there were lots of inscriptions. Most of these walls were inscribed. There were statues, there were all kinds of defining, let's say, elements from each city-state. And these continued all the way up this path that goes up to the temple. So as we walk along the sacred way, there were not only treasuries, there were also niches like this one here that contain statues. So this is where the statues of the kings of Argos were held. And there was down here where these people are standing a Trojan horse reconstruction. That was a gift again from the Argives, the people of Argos, following a victory against Sparta. So a very important victory for them, and so they brought that here to thank the god Apollo. Or more likely, rather than to thank the god Apollo, to show off, because when people came here, they would see all of these treasury buildings. And so it was very important that if you were from a specific city-state, your treasury looked nicer than the one next door, kind of a keeping up with the Joneses of antiquity here. So we've come up the sacred way, and we're in a bend in the path here. I want to show you this right here. This conical shape is a representation of the omphalos. The omphalos was the navel. Delphi was considered to be the center of the world for the ancients, and this was its sort of physical, let's say, representation. Here in front of us is the only reconstructed treasury, so you get an idea of what the treasuries would have looked like, albeit the fact that the Athenian treasury, of course, was really spectacular. Let's go around front to see it. So the Athenian treasury was placed at a very strategic spot, a bend in the sacred way. This is reconstructed, but you can see really the opulence of it. But it's nothing compared to what it would have looked like in ancient times. It would have been painted with all kinds of offerings on the outside, on the sides, and so on. So this is one of the treasuries, the treasury of the Athenians. So after the treasury, we continue on. This is called the Rock of Sibyl. It's one of the most holy spots in, or sacred spots in Delphi. I've done a video about that. And then look at that polygonal wall that holds up the Temple of Apollo behind it. That wall is a really amazing example of engineering and of anti-seismic construction. In front of it, there was a stoa, a porticoed area. So those columns are there that would have held up a roof. And it's called the Stoa of the Athenians. So continuing up the sacred path here, and coming closer to this polygonal wall, you'll see that the entire thing has inscriptions on it. They're like pages of inscriptions, and most of these are liberations of slaves. Have a look. So I've done a video about this specifically. So now we're on the last stretch, and we're going up to that gray structure there, which was actually the altar of the Temple of Apollo. Now, in ancient times, the altars of temples were outside of the temples. Here you can just see the reconstructed columns of the temple to the left. And this is where all of the sacrifices would be made on top of this altar. Let's go up and check it out. So here I am at the level of the temple. This is the front side of the altar. We came around from that path. And here's the temple. You can see the ramp that leads up to the base of the temple. That ramp was so that larger offerings could be brought up into the temple. The temple itself was destroyed completely, and these columns were just reconstructed so you could get an idea of what the temple would have looked like in ancient times. And if I just pan around, you can see that there are bases and other dedicatory columns, and all of these blocks over here would have had statues and different offerings around the temple, because this area up here, this level where the temple is, would have been the closest, obviously, to the temple, so one of the VIP areas to put any kind of offering that you had. So the temple itself, as we know, sat on two fissures that released ethane and methane. And in a basement room, so it was called the Aziton, sat the Pythia, the priestess, who was the intermediary between Apollo and humans. So this is where the oracles would be given, the prophecies, in a basement room in this temple here. I'm not going to go into details about how that happened because I've done many videos about Delphi and specifically about the oracles and so on. You can just go to my Delphi playlist for that. So this is just walking along the base of the temple. As I said, all that remains today is the base. The columns were re-erected so that you could get an idea of what these beautiful Doric columns look like. Of course, they would have been in much better shape and painted at the capitals and so on in antiquity. Okay, so I'm going to walk back the way I came. You can see this wall right here. This is propping up the next level of the archaeological site, which holds, among other things, the most important part, which is the theater. So here you can see I'm going up the path that leads to the next level up here, the theater. There is the temple down below. People often ask me about the accessibility of different sites, and I just have to say that, unfortunately, Delphi is not accessible to people in wheelchairs, to people with handicaps. So that's at some point in the future, I'm sure that will be rectified. Okay, so I finally arrived to the next level, which holds the theater. Have a look down below me here. There's the temple, so up above the temple is where the theater is. Let's go have a look at the theater. So here we are at the theater of Delphi, and you can see that it's at a spot that's above the temple. That's the temple base right there. Down there, this was the treasury of the Athenians that we walked past on our way up. So you can see that the whole site's on different levels. So you might be wondering, why is there a theater at a place where oracular statements were made? The reason for this is that the Delphians had every 4 years a series of games, a cycle of games that were called the Pythian Games. So similar to the Olympic Games or the Isthmian Games, there were several cycles of games in ancient times. The Pythian Games rather, were both athletic and cultural in nature. So down here you can see some of the facilities for the athletic part. And up above the theater here is a stadium. You can't access it because it's closed at the moment, but the theater was for putting on, of course, plays. So plays were an integral part of it, poetry reading and so on. So it had this cultural aspect that, for example, the Olympic Games most of the time did not have. So when the stadium is open, you would take these stairs right past the theater to go up. It's another maybe 10-minute climb up to the top of the mountain, and that's the final level to this multi-leveled archaeological site. So like I said at the beginning, this was just going to be a brief overview of the site, so kind of like a Delphi in 10 minutes. But if you're interested in more specifics about the different things like the temple, the different places in Delphi, or how Delphi worked, how the oracle worked, I've got a whole playlist on Delphi that goes into detail on each of those things.